Hi, I'm Brandy,
And I'm Jen.
and this is
Keepin' It Simple.
Hi, welcome to Keeping It Simple. This is your host, Brandy.
And Jen.
And in today's premiere episode for Keeping It Simple, we're going to be talking about the falcon, which is also synonymous with the hawk in many parts of the world.
That's right.
And we chose this symbol for a lot of reasons for our podcast. And to give you an idea, Jen's going to hit some of the key symbolism meanings for this particular animal. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a spirit animal. It's what most people associate it with.
It is, yeah.
So when people are looking for the meaning of a spirit animal or how this animal might show up in their life or what it might mean, what are some keywords that they have?
Well, there's a bunch because the falcon is pretty epic. So I'm going to give you a whole bunch, but then we'll also, retrace our steps back to some of these with actual stories behind these.
Yeah.
So we'll give you some of the whys as we dig a little deeper into this. Solar, soul, celestial, ascension, alchemy, divine light, intellect and morality, conquest and victory. Victory is a really big one, I think. I think that one really carries over through a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Victory. Prophecy and message. That's a big one too. Lightning and speed or fast. Like we'll get into that, but like wicked fast. To seize something, freedom, liberation, wealth and refinement, and royalty and kingship.
It's
a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot, right?
So I think that there's really, if there's any one point to kick off Falcon, what would it be?
I think just that birds of prey energy. I mean, this is an amazing creature.
Well, they're a raptor. Yeah.
They're a raptor. Yeah. And their ability to kill and ability to hunt is unparalleled. And just so we're all straight from the very beginning, what do you think is the fastest animal on this earth? The cheetah?
Oh no, I would think it would be the falcon.
It is the falcon.
Yeah, they're far. Yeah, they're incredible.
Up to 200 miles per hour and they'll dive at that speed. It's insane. They are fast. They are the fastest creature on this earth living.
Well, it makes sense. It was what we were talking about with, hearing that they break their necks of animals and then they go down afterwards. And a lot of the times people don't even see when they swoop down and kill something. They just see them then return and grab the carcass, basically, to take off with.
It's probably more than our sad little human vision can even take in.
Yeah, which is that's also interesting because I was reading that they have telescopic vision.
Ooh, I think is that with that extra layer?
So it's talking about it's like it's not only their ability to like laser in on something, right? But it also was saying that it slows down time 30 times, I believe is what it was. And so when it talks about us not being able to perceive a dragonfly's wings, it moves in slow motion for them. So they see everything and it's almost like it reminded me of the Matrix, right? The movies. So he slows down. Yes. So the way that he slows down, it's very interesting to think of. They have the ability to be the fastest animal.
Right.
But at the same time, they have the ability to literally slow down almost like time and motion around them in order to make those lightning strikes.
It's like a superpower. And that's probably why we'll touch on that, but why a lot of cultures even consider them supernatural creatures.
Oh, yeah. There's tons of
rightly so. Yeah. That membrane, that was actually an evolutionary thing for falcons. That extra layer of eye membrane that they can close is beyond even that's an evolution that they've actually seen happen from more ancient falcons to modern falcons. It's science. I love it. I mean, it's fascinating. It's like, what?
Well, let's kick it back then. Let's go way back. Let's go back to ancient Egypt.
Okay. Go.
So the falcon is synonymous with kingship in Egypt. And a lot of people know it as relation to Horus, right? So with Horus was the one whose father Osiris was killed. Right. And so then you have the eye of Horus. And so the falcon had two sides. One eye was the sun and one eye was the moon. But the eye of Horus in its just symbolism in general deals with the ability to be the all-seeing eye. So when you think about falcons and you're talking about the lens, right? And the membranes, it's again, that ability to see everything. So imagine what you would see if you could slow down time. Imagine what you could see if you can move at 200 miles an hour while slowing down time.
Right.
It reminded me when I was reading about it, it's almost like a wormhole type thing that we hear about, like, you know, the ability.
Yes.
So when we talk about Horus, what was interesting is it's also talking about, it is a symbol for Ra as well. And there's actually several deities in Egypt that it's related to, that the falcon is related to. So here's what I find really cool is that the hieroglyph for the falcon means God or divine kingship in Egypt. So when you see it in the hieroglyph, it's just God in general.
Right.
And so it is seen as Horus and Ra and a few others, but that's pretty cool. So anytime you now see a hieroglyph, you'll be able to say, hey, the falcon means God.
Right.
It's literally showing divine kingship. So
I love that.
What do you have? What did you think?
Well, let's see. I'll definitely go back to some science because I love me some science, but I do want to hit on Norse mythology, because there's a couple different places where the falcon shows up in Norse mythology.
One of them is related to the eye.
Ooh, do you want to tell me about that one, and then I'll go into the other one?
No, you have it. You have it. It's the one we were talking about.
Oh, yes, you already know it.
The eye that I was so happy that you found too. Yeah.
Yes. Well, first and foremost, the falcon in Norse mythology is related to Freya and Frigg. Frigg is Odin's wife, so she's kind of the head, female power in Norse mythology. Freya is a pretty important goddess in the pantheon as well. They both were attributed with having cloaks made of falcon feathers so that they could actually shapeshift into the falcon to go into other worlds and other realms, which I'm reading that and I'm like, oh, that is so cool. I like it. It gives me chills. In the Viking age, the Volvas were these essentially like their magic workers. And I made sure to look up some of the pronunciations of these because they're tricky. The Norse stuff is tricky. But their type of magic was called satyr. And both Freya and Frigg were attributed with working in this magic in a vulva form. And part of that magic was very tied to the falcon. They wear that falcon cloak they would shapeshift into a falcon. They would go to other realms, and they could actually perform some of this magic for people and do acts of magic. It's just, I love it. So the other one that is really, really cool in Norse mythology is there's a very specific falcon. Again, I had to look up the pronunciation.
I know, I saw the name and I was like, whoa, that's a name. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys can Google because even just the spelling is like, whoa, Vidafinir. I think I said that right. Vidafinir. Vidafinir is a specific falcon that would sit on the beak between the eyes of an eagle. Keep up with me here. On top of the tree of life in Norse mythology. Yggdrasil, do you think I'm saying that right? Yggdrasil?
I don't know the pronunciation.
You know the word. Yeah. And that's another big, tongue twister. Forgive me if I mispronounced that one. Yggdrasil, the world tree. And so I just love that it's a bird on top of tree.
Yeah.
But because that falcon was the all-seeing and could have the highest vantage point to see everything in creation, if you will, from the world tree. And I love that he even sits on top of the beak of an eagle. So even the eagle is not as important as the falcon. Did you see the point
where it was talking about also it was on the crown of the world tree?
No.
Which, see, I found that fascinating because when you talk about Western mystery tradition, well, not just Western mystery tradition, but you talk about the tree of life, you have the crown, right? And that's where the divine principle sits. And so it was very interesting to me that they both talked about the crown on the tree of life.
Right.
And the eagle is often synonymous with God. And then now we have the falcon synonymous with God.
Right.
But the falcon sits between the eyes of the eagle. So to me, it was very much about the falcon being the third eye of God.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm getting chills. I love that.
Isn't that cool?
Yes. And I love that it ties back to another whole system. And when you put it together in that light, that's amazing.
And if you think of Horus, the eye of Horus being the all-seeing eye.
Yes.
And his father was Osiris.
Right.
There you go. So it was I know it was pretty cool. That's why I was like, ooh. That's definitely one we've got to hit.
Yeah. And I also love, again, I gotta say, Vida Veneer, also makes a little, manifests itself in modern times because I don't know if you're familiar with Rick Riordan and his works.
No.
My son adores his books, so that's one of the reasons I've now gotten hooked on them too. Rick Riordan did the Percy Jackson series. A lot of people know that. Yeah. But he also has a whole offshoot series called Magnus Chase, which is his version of some of the Norse mythologies and the retellings. And I think Rick Riordan is brilliant because he has taken actual mythology and mythological stories and woven them in a very funny modern retelling with new characters and demigods and such. But he has this whole Norse series, and so I love it because he has apparently Vida Veneer is actually pretty sassy in that one and makes an appearance in Magnus Chase. And so the Norse name actually for Vida Veneer actually means storm pale, wind bleached, or wind witherer, which is really kind of cool. So he takes that and it flaps its wings in his book to create these windstorms. So there's apparently a character that is wanting the world tree to fall apart. And so he's literally just constantly like giving him insults and putting him down and pissing him off so that he'll flap harder, so that it'll be destroyed or sooner. So it's kind of just a funny take on that.
When you're talking about the storm, so that also ties back to a lot of the Native Americans that deal with the Thunderbird, and it is often associated with, and it's not just Native Americans, First Nations people, but it's throughout the world. There's several cultures that talk about like the Thunderbird. Right. And it's interesting because they talk about the flapping of the wings causes the sound of thunder. Right. In a storm, and the eyes is what would shoot the lightning. Right. So that's very interesting. And it's often synonymous with a hawk or a falcon. Right. So that's interesting.
This is why we nerd out people.
Different people, places in the world. Right. That's really interesting.
And I love that. This is, I think, why you and I even nerd out on this stuff, because when you start to see the intersections of all the cultures, all the time periods, it's just so fascinating the way they all have these
same symbolism.
The same,
that just kind of run together.
But I love it. I'm nerding out. I'm having fun.
So I'm going to jump into Celtic stuff.
Go for it.
Okay. So one of the things that I thought was really cool was, I think it's Sebhag. And it's talking about clear-sightedness and memory that carries messages basically from other worlds to be aware of or to act quickly. Right. So I thought that was really cool.
Especially the clear-sightedness.
Yeah. And so the Celts believed that if you hear a hawk cry, that you needed to be paying attention, be highly alert to an upcoming or impending situation, particularly if you were on your journey and one oversaw it. It meant that you were about to have some sort of something that would require quick action. Right. So this is also pretty cool. I'm sure you've heard that the Great Flood, right? Yeah. Most people have heard it, but there are many cultures, pretty much everyone in the world has their own Great Flood story. Right. And they're very similar, and so that's interesting. But I'm going to botch this name. It's Fenton Mabroch, I think is how Machbarach, and survived the Great Flood by transforming into a salmon, and then into an eagle, and then into a hawk. Oh. And he became the wise seer who knew all the history of Ireland.
That's fascinating.
So that's pretty cool. I know. And I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. So again, we have that eagle to hawk transformation, right? Right. And so I thought that was cool. There's another one out of Ireland that talks about Juan Mac Coriol. Again, I apologize for our listeners botching the names, but it was the falcon was one of the successive shapes through which this primordial character passed. And it talks about the eagle again. And that is where the Welsh really brought in the importance of falconry that came into the 10th century Welsh. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty cool, but it deals with, again, that the primordial character that passed, and it reminded me about the Buddha, but that's a story for a different day. Right. So I know you are fascinated by falconry. So let's talk about falconry.
Yeah. So falconry dates back. There's actually several different accounts of how far it dates back. Looking at my nerd notes. First off, it was originally thought to date back 4,000 to 6,000 years in Mongolia, but there actually is evidence it may date even farther back to around 10,000 BC. They think there was a king in Iran that there's some evidence that may have even had been involved with falconry as far as now it definitely its origins was more for basically feeding people. It became
Hunting.
Yes, it was truly because they were using their skill of hunting and accessing that and training them so that they could actually get food.
Let's talk about what falconry is for anybody who may not listen. What is falconry?
Falconry is now known more or less as a sport where a human actually works with a falcon and trains the
excuse the running, screaming children if you can hear them in the background. Okay, so
what is that? Falconry basically uses a trained falcon that they train up so that they can utilize their skills they usually have them on their arm and they have a little visor over them, and when it's time that because they can usually spot using a team, and they will release them to go get that prey and bring it back to them. So they're essentially helping and aiding the human, by essentially hunting for the human.
That's how a lot of people today use dogs.
Exactly. Like hunting dogs.
But
exactly.
Falcons are much faster than dogs. And
much
they have the
faster.
sky advantage.
And much more lethal too.
Yes.
And they're amazing at what they do, but it's definitely developed more into a sport, where it's just like hunting, where it's not always about just feeding or feeding our families. It's actually about who can do the best, and there's competitions, and even in modern day, there's competitions for falconry.
So you're talking about, you said Iran is what you believe it was, the latest?
Yeah, that was from the 10,000 BC. 10,000 BC that they think they actually can date. Let's see if I have. Yep, here it was. It was. They believe it was a king in Iran. Records have been found of a king using birds of prey who may have lived as much as 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I found when I was digging, not only is it, it's China, Japan, and all over Europe.
Yeah.
That it went from hunting, right, to then it was a matter of more of a sport from royalty and their aristocrats.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was pretty cool. One of the things that I dug out in that was talking about why falcons or hawks are so prevalent in predominantly, not always, but medieval art all the way up to modern.
Right.
And it was talking about that had a tie to the royalty and the aristocrats, because the hawks were representative of those who were in favor of war and fighting for something, and the doves were really the pacifists that were more of the let's just be compromising, that sort of thing.
Peace.
So if you see hawks or falcons, again, because a lot of these are synonymous with one another in terms of the symbolism and where they show up in the world, when you see those two birds together, now you have a better understanding of what they literally represent. As the hawks were those of the aristocrats who favored war and resolution through military action.
Right.
And your doves were just those who wanted to come up with peace and compromise.
Which I love, because the dove even makes it to the 60s. It's still a symbol of peace, love.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty,
which I love.
So it's really interesting because now you have that extra. So you've got that kingship, that godliness, that royalty, the aristocracy, but you also have the war, right? And the hunting and being, zeroing in on your target.
The predator side of it.
It's very interesting to me.
I actually found it was really interesting too, because there was a whole, beyond just the fact that it was a status symbol in the Middle Ages, because you had to usually be rich or royalty or of high placement to be able to,
even afford it.
Because
you had to be a part of it.
But they became up with a whole structure that were even certain types of falcons weren't allowed to be owned unless, for example, a king could own a grifalcon.
Yeah, I pulled that too. I thought that was cool.
Isn't that interesting? A duke could have a rock falcon, an earl a peregrine, a yeoman could have a goshawk, and a servant a kestrel. And so even your placement in society said which kind of hawk you were allowed to do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, which kind of falcon you could do falconry with. Yeah. I'm like, that's freaking interesting.
I thought that was pretty fascinating as well. And so I was digging in, and it was talking about the females were not permitted to even have them, except there was one that only was allowed by the queen if she chose to partake in it. But that I couldn't find anything that said like queen such and such. If you can hear the children in the background, we are recording in a hotel room. So
with paper than walls.
Yes. Yay. So We apologize for those listening if you heard the children yelling and screaming up and down the hallway. But it was interesting because I didn't find anything that said, and I really didn't go too far down that rabbit hole, but I didn't find anything that said like a particular queen or, lady under the queenship had one. I just found the males, which I found was really interesting as well.
Now, speaking of gender roles, did you know that with falcons, the male falcons are 50% smaller than the female falcons typically?
Well, no, but it makes sense. I mean, if you think a lot of birds of prey, the females are often bigger.
That's true. That's true in most birds of prey.
Because a lot of them, they not only have the eggs, the babies, but then they turn around and they'll be the hunters. Why the father typically, which I mean, some birds swap back and forth.
But I guess it made for the women or the female falcons to be more able to take down larger prey. Because apparently falcons will even sometimes go after deer if they're feeling really
absolutely.
Because they can literally take down a damn deer.
Yeah, here in Texas, I mean, I know down here they are not afraid of taking out small deer. I mean, if they can take it out, they're going to take it out.
Right.
So I can imagine a falcon that can move substantially faster. Yeah.
And girl power,
Yeah.
Come on, girls, let's go.
So I'm going to piggyback off the falconry and talk about the hooded falcon, which I thought was really cool. Because for those who are interested in tarot, if you know, in the Nine of Pentacles, we have the hooded falcon that's in there, right? Or it could be a hooded hawk, whatever you want to call it. But what I found really cool is that it means, like, we typically think of it as falconry, right? So it's like shutting out the lights, dimming the lights. So hope in the light, which is nourished by those who live in the darkness. And so it literally talks about being prisoners or spiritual, I don't want to say outlets, but basically being stifled spiritually, like you're having your light dimmed. And so to have that light hidden under a bushel of esoteric knowledge.
Ooh,
isn't that cool?
That's deep.
So it talks about, this is why a lot of the Renaissance printers adopted the emblem of the hooded falcon with the device, and I apologize if I botch this, post tenebras spero lucium, which means after darkness, I hope for light. And that's why it became the Boswell family crest.
That is really interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things. And so I know you studied classical art, right? And I love it. So when I started digging in, I've always been fascinated by why some of these animals show up. You understand their symbolism, you understand their meaning.
Right.
But to find that, I had never heard of that before in terms of, it's literally after darkness, I hope for light.
That's really interesting.
And so you take that back to the Nine of Pentacles in the tarot. And so it's literally, if you think about some of the strife that you go through, right, in building, and the Five of Pentacles, and then the Six, you're getting that charity and equality. And then the Seventh, you're kind of like, well, this is, really not going anywhere.
Right.
That limited success or reward. And then 8, you're working towards it again, which I also find interesting because that card's associated, the Eight of Pentacles, with the Master Mason.
Oh,
and so,
yes.
And then you start talking about the Nine of Pentacles, and seeing again that aristocrat, right? So you see that in the Nine of Pentacles, and there's a lady on it, which I found was interesting.
That is interesting.
It's a female and not a male. It's in the Nine of Pentacles.
Because she even has the falconry glove on in the Nine of Pentacles traditionally.
And then when we were looking at who could own certain falcons,
right?
Why is there a lady?
That's
and then 9 of, isn't it?
Especially because you couldn't find an exact woman who is known to have been a falconry person.
And then, so, I mean, we could dive deeper down into the 9 of Pentacles, but I just found all of that was rather interesting when you associate a hooded falcon with that.
Right.
And women weren't necessarily supposed to be a part of esoteric knowledge. You weren't supposed to be a seeker of that. So there is a lady on a card that's associated with darkness from esoteric knowledge, or the light that comes out.
Really interesting.
Isn't it?
Now, there is a queen that was associated with the falcon.
Okay.
Anne Boleyn.
Really?
Yep. That was her primary symbol. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
That actually blew my mind. Because I love me some Tudor history.
I did not.
Brandy knows I love me some Tudor history.
That's definitely something to go down, because you would know that the Golden Dawn would have knowledge of Tudor history. I mean, so I'm wondering if Anne Boleyn
Well, I'm also curious
serves
because
as
she was
inspiration.
considered, to possibly be a witch. I mean,
Yeah,
there was a lot of, accusation that she was magical herself. She had 6 fingers too,
that whole line is
which is
magical.
really, which is so that's also kind of an interesting caveat, but
Hmm.
yeah, she had there's a song from her when she had her coronation in 1533 called The White Falcon.
Really?
It's mainly, we don't need to read the whole thing. But it's definitely interesting because it talks a lot about, I think it likens her to a falcon, which is really interesting because she is ascending, definitely upping her, where she places in society, at least for a time, as we know.
Which you could associate with the 9 of Pentacles as well.
That's right. That's right.
I like that.
And but it also talks about a lot about fruitfulness, and which they're talking about. Obviously, she's going to bear all these amazing children for the country, and we all know kind of some of that went awry. But because she was the falcon was so tied to her, they put over 150 carved oak falcon emblems throughout the ceilings in the Great Hall at Hampton Court. And of course, once things went awry, as we all know, I'm assuming everybody knows, I guess I shouldn't assume, but Anne Boleyn was the second wife of Henry VIII, and he had her beheaded for various reasons. And so things didn't go her way in the end, although she gave birth to one of the most amazing queens ever, Queen Elizabeth I. And but she basically, after that, whenever they painted them over them black, so a lot of these were just, you wouldn't see that. Some of them are still there. They said they're still there. You can actually look up and see the faint imprint shape because it's carved, but they're painted over. But apparently there was one that made it to auction in recent times. I thought this was so interesting. So that
what did it go for? That's what I want to know.
75 pounds.
Really?
And it's worth $250,000.
Wow.
So there was apparently somebody there that knew their stuff.
And
it was like, I'll take it. Because it was also apparently, they think some of them might have been silver. And so they're not sure if it was, because it was very blackened and it didn't look good at auction. It was like, okay, it's a thing.
But if you know what you're getting, that's the difference.
So I don't know if it was some of it was oak, some of it was silver. It sounds like it's kind of a multi-piece, but apparently it's a very beautiful piece. And it's an oak falcon resting on a bed of red and white Tudor roses. Her favorite emblem. But I just thought that was so interesting because, there's a whole backstory of somebody who was a sympathizer to Anne Boleyn. And God knows if they tried to preserve one of those, because it wasn't, obviously it wasn't on the ceiling. The ones that are still there just painted over because they're like, oh, let's just forget about her and paint over those and wipe her out of history. So somebody took time and care. We'll never know who probably, but somebody took time and care to try to preserve that as a keepsake of who she was.
That's freaking cool. I want to dig more into this Anne, because my daughter is obsessed with Anne Boleyn.
Is she?
So much so that I know Anne Boleyn's death date.
Whoa.
May 19th, apparently. That's my daughter's graduation date. And she is just fascinated by the fact that her graduation date is Anne Boleyn's death date.
Don't you have bloodline with the Tudors?
I do.
Okay, that's right. I don't mean to be personal.
I know. Yeah. So her sister Mary is my 14th great grandmother.
Oh, okay.
So the bastard that she had with King Henry, which wasn't claimed at the time, but now historians
they've given him proper attribute.
Yes.
So
but
cool.
I find that very fascinating about Anne Boleyn. I did not know that, and I wonder if my daughter knows that. It's serious enough that she wants to get Anne Boleyn's necklace tattooed on her. That's how, not around her neck, but the emblem of the bee.
Right.
She's obsessed. I'm like, okay.
That's so interesting.
So I'm going to have to dig into this Anne Boleyn, and I want to know how that relates to the 9 of Pentacles back. And I'm sure somebody's probably already done this, and I just haven't gone down that route.
Right. That rabbit hole.
I want to go down that rabbit hole now.
That's right.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about, let's hit a few other things in terms of in the Middle Ages, which I found was interesting, right?
Right.
So falcons are often depicted tearing apart rabbits or hares.
Yes.
And so I thought this is interesting. But what it was talking about in this, so have you seen the movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks with?
Yes.
Okay. One of my favorite movies. Right. I love the movie. All right. But what I found fascinating is there's rabbits and falcons that are depicted in the beginning, if you see the original movie, like in the artwork in the beginning, because it ties back to the Middle Ages is what they're trying to show you.
Okay.
And so the falcons that are tearing apart these rabbits are signifying conquest of lust, right? So they're supposed to be like victory, the solar that's conquering the rabbit, which is associated with divine, the darkness, the feminine, which makes sense at the time, right? And it's also the intellect that's conquering over the intuition and the emotional side, because this is supposed to be again in that age of enlightenment.
Right.
So I found that really cool. It's just one of those that if you, I really encourage our listeners, readers, and watchers, you know, our listeners and our watchers to go look at some of these, and we're going to drop them on the Instagram and on the Facebook, to look at some of these middle-aged depictions of these rabbits and these, I mean, falcons just shredding them. It's kind of amazing how many there are, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. So you're dealing with that superiority and conquest and that male principle.
Well, and I love, just to get all sciencey again real quick, I'm going to shift it back to science, because you and I have had this ongoing, is a hawk. Oh my God, I don't give a fuck. Is a hawk a falcon? Or we could make it like a liger, right?
Yes,
let's get a falcon and a hawk together in a room and just put on some romantic music, smell green, and then they'll make a fawk. Okay. And then if it doesn't work out, we can say we have no more Fox to give. Oh my goodness.
We did.
All right. I went there. Okay.
But at least we're not doing shadow hand puppets anymore, folks. Oh, okay. There we go.
Anyway. Okay. Sorry. So, I digress. We got off a little bit there. We're getting a little goofy.
That's okay.
That's okay. What was I talking? Oh, yes. So is a falcon a hawk? Is a hawk a falcon? Brandy and I have had many a discussion leading up to this. And so for the most part, they are very, very closely related, as we've talked, and they're definitely interchangeable, but they are not the same. And so one of the things that makes them distinctively different is the falcon has what is called a tomial tooth. And it is a special little feature that they have. It's a groove on the side of their beak, and it helps them kill even more easily, as if they needed another advantage. And so I love this. It literally helps to quickly sever its prey's spinal column at the base of the skull to kill it quickly. I'm like, woo, that's pretty swift, right? And a hawk does not have that.
Yes.
So they're great at killing too.
What was interesting when you were talking about that is this kind of ties to, well, many different things, but one of the things that it ties to is a funerary bird.
Yes.
So it's associated with death, not just because of the death that it causes, but one of the things, and do you want to talk about this in Greek?
No, Circe? You go for it.
Okay. So you have Apollo, right? So he's the sun god, which is interesting because you're tying back to Ra, and you're tying, and so you've got that's going on. But he used a hawk as his messenger, and he often transformed into a hawk. Now that's Apollo, right?
Right.
However, at the same time, he's also associated with Circe, and so her name, is Kirkos and so it's the same as the name of the death goddess Circe, which is interesting, whose island was a funerary shrine. And so she would often transform her enemies into animals, of which some of those were hawks.
Right.
Which was interesting because, again, they're dealing with that death concept. And then I was looking at them being released in Japan and in China and stuff like that. That's kind of like how we release doves sometimes with death.
Right.
They will release falcons or hawks.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's really cool.
I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that was interesting that kind of deals with not necessarily the death side of stuff. I mean, it is. But the reason they do that is because, again, it talks about that ascension of the soul. Right?
Yes, so ascension's a big one.
Yeah, so it's talking about the way that this is really cool. Their high and spiraling upward flight is what is associated with ascension, which also tied into medieval stuff. That's a way that they would see it, is the way that they spiral when they ascend, but also when they kill. A lot of the times,
do a dive
they'll do a dive straight down, and then they ascend straight up. Isn't that cool? But it reminded me a lot of the tree of life. So when we move up the tree of life, It's that caduceus, that's that winding, right? And then when we descend, it is that, but sometimes you have that lightning flash or the descent of manifestation, which is straight down.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And the falcon's associated with lightning
Oh my
strike.
gosh, yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Isn't that cool?
Yes, my brain is lighting up right now.
It's like that.
I love it.
I thought it was really, really neat.
Also, if we're talking about kind of the death aspects of the falcon, which again is not necessarily as prevalent in the meaning, but it can be associated with the funerary
Well,
death.
the soul. It's not just death.
Right. And just like any symbol, it's death is rarely actual death. It's usually something else, or an ending. But the actual Latin name for the falcon is falco, and it's derived from the words falx and falsus, meaning sickle. And so I thought that was interesting because you think about the Grim Reaper essentially as a sickle to harvest the wheat and stuff. So I just thought that was an interesting loose tie again to.
But that's how it works. So that's what's really freaking interesting. Man. I know. So one of the things that I was looking at that came out of Hinduism is that the falcon or the hawk is one that steals from the heavenly abode of its guardians and divine soma, the elixir of immortality and inspiration. So it's literally like this bird that's not just up there, but it has that sense of, immortality and the ability to bring. So again, it's that soul, that divine principle, the divine within.
Right.
That to me was pretty neat, that not only do you have it in Hinduism, but it's in Buddhism and it's in Japan, and they call it the Garuda, which is the golden wing.
Ooh.
And so it's also seen in Judaism. The wings are so big that it blocks out the sun, and that in many of these cultures, it's associated with the phoenix, the rising. Yeah. So again, that transformation, that ascension, that alchemical process. So that to me was pretty neat to see just so many cultures, again, that see whether you say falcon or hawk or what did you call it?
That was the Latin falcon.
No, I'm talking about your
my hawk falcon mashup.
Yes.
Falk. It's a flock.
There you go. Yeah.
Because you don't know a flock.
Yeah, it was pretty neat to see that. But it's whether you're talking about the falcon or the hawk, so many of these talk about ascension, divine principles, life, death, rebirth. And again, that dealing with the divine masculine and kingship and the divine father, sky father, that sort of thing, which is pretty cool. You see that really heavily. And Polynesia, when they see them, they're considered prophets that have healing power. Oh. So that was pretty cool to see that just the healing, I don't want to say just the healing power, but to see it say not just prophecy and bringing this message from the gods or God or whatever, but also that healing power, which reminded me of Hermes.
Oh, yes.
And Thoth.
Yes.
And bringing down, that mercurial energy, information, knowledge, divine. I thought that was really interesting. So you start seeing that.
Right.
I thought, anyways.
Woo.
So I thought that was pretty cool. So let's, that's all I really had at the particular moment. Did you have anything else?
Oh, I've got little just pop culture stuff. That may be a light.
I do too. Yeah.
Oh, do you?
What you got?
Well, I was impressed with your bed knobs and broomsticks. Like bringing out the more modern.
You watch it enough. Modern. That's what happens when you have small children, right? You watch it on repeat.
Well, we can't have a discussion about the Falcon without talking Marvel, because I love superheroes. We know this, right?
Yeah, I know
history, superheroes.
And bed knobs and broomsticks, and you're Marvel. I got it.
And most people know this in the Marvel universe. There's actually a superhero named Falcon, and who eventually takes over the role of Captain America. I mean, that's a whole. I'm not going to give you spoilers, and I'm not going to go into the whole universe, but some of the interesting ties in my mind. Well, first off, I want to read.
He's good looking.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's hot, by the way. Cute. But I want to read this quote from Falcon, the character Falcon. I don't know. I just thought this was actually inspiring, but I love superhero stuff. Captain America is not just for the good days. He can't be. I can't be. If Captain America can't stand for the dream on the very worst day when America's fallen, then there is no Captain America, because our worst day is where we start from, where we rise from. And if the man in the flag is too special to fall and rise and struggle with the rest, then God help us all. So I love that. So the character, his human name is Sam Wilson. I love this. And so I love that, because where we rise from is our worst day. I just love that, because it's, again, ascension.
Well, and it
right?
goes back to that hooded falcon
Yes.
again, that darkness
Exactly.
and the light.
Exactly.
Yes, I love that.
And also Sam Wilson, I just thought this was kind of a notable thing. Apparently was one of the first African-American superheroes, which I think is really badass, if you ask me. And also the first not to have black in his name. Like, it's like, yeah, they actually gave him a superhero title without saying, no, the Black Avenger.
Yeah, the Black Panther,
yeah, which, I mean, nothing against the Black Panther. We love the Black Panther, but
but to give, something separate.
That's notable.
And how cool is it that that's what he represents, is something that, so he literally is the light,
right,
following the darkness that's come. I love that.
And the character grew up in like a really tough neighborhood in Harlem and lost his parents early to like crime and stuff. So he had this
that ascension,
and then
that going through it.
And I think it's good to point out, ascension doesn't have to be, I was born into a royal family, and so I'm just going to easily be up in this upper status symbol, royalty, wealth, refinement, all those things that it can symbolize too. Ascension is a process.
Yes.
So it's a process, and a lot of that comes from your soul,
what you do inside, and the divine light.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where you get that soul, that death, that rebirth.
Exactly.
So the one I had that was very interesting to me, that stood out, is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
Oh,
the peregrine falcon.
I never even thought about that.
So she transforms into a falcon, but he oversees all of these unusual children who are orphans. And so when you start talking about people who perhaps are different for whatever reason, physically, developmentally, mentally, whatever, the falcon is like the guardian that sees over that. Isn't that cool?
I love that.
So I started thinking about it, and I was like, how neat is it that they made her a falcon? And now, again, I've only seen the movie, I think, like twice, right? So I'm not very adept, and I know it is a book, which maybe I don't read very many fiction books. Right. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I was really like, that's everything that they could have made, or that the author could have made, be the, such and such as Home for Peculiar Children.
I love that.
They chose Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and the Peregrine Falcon, which is often associated with, again, that solar energy, but it's a female, not a male.
Oh, yes. See?
That's what I'm telling you. I think there's some like deep dive, some more stuff that we need to go down.
And which deep dive? I mean, I'm talking literally.
I know, a deep dive. So there was one in here that I was going to talk about that I thought was pretty cool. They're associated. So one of the things that we really want to cover in our show and doing this podcast is not just what does this symbolism mean, like what is associated with, but what does it mean when it shows up into your life?
Yes. Yes.
And so when we talk about the falcon, we've given you tons of falcon hawk associations, right? So again, you're talking about, the soul, the solar, we're talking about divine kingship, wealth, that sort of thing. Right. The ascension, right? The death and rebirth process. But it could be as simple as, I thought this was interesting, one fell swoop when we're talking about sayings, right?
I like that.
And so when it shows up in your life, it may not just be about life, death, rebirth, ascension, needing to see the bird's eye view of something. Right. And that, the all-seeing eye, of course, and that sort of thing. But it can just be about making lightning fast decisions, taking action. Yeah, not overthinking things, which was something that we're
both guilty of that, I think.
Yeah. So I think that it's something to consider. Whether you see a falcon or a hawk, I mean, and it depends on the context in which you see it.
That's true.
So whether it's sitting on a light pole and it's just calmly sitting there observing, is it looking at you? Are you seeing one eye, like the eye of Horus, or both eyes? Right. So that's very interesting to me. Are you seeing the left eye versus the right eye, which can be the solar versus the moon, right? The lunar. But then you have, if its wings are spread out, perhaps you're being told to just literally spread your wings, see the higher eye view of something, go with the flow. Right.
And they literally build their nests in the highest parts of the highest trees. And then obviously like Norse, even they're leaving on the top of the crown of the tree. Yeah. Like they're up there. So aim high, like literally like set your sights high, know how high you can rise, know how high you can ascend.
So
like believe in your,
Yeah.
like aim high and believe in yourself, you know, like literally some simple ways to look
Stuff.
at it.
And I think that's the thing that people, this is a big reason we wanted to do this podcast. And now, you know, it's a YouTube as well, is because we wanted to show you guys that symbols really are simple. Like it's literally taking something, analyzing it, looking at it, but from more of a simplistic view, that sometimes you really don't need to just Google what is the spirit animal of a falcon, what is the spirit animal of a hawk. Like look at it, look at the qualities of that animal, look at the historical religious context and what its meaning is, and then how does that apply in your life?
Right.
So if you see hawk or falcon over the next however long, or perhaps you ask for it.
That's true.
You can
That's another
always
way to
ask
get
for a
that
symbol. Yes, is to ask what, you know, perhaps where in my life does this need to be something that I pay attention to?
Right.
Or if you ask for a general symbol of, you know, I just need a sign, and you have the hawk or the falcon show up in your life. Now you have some actual workable information.
Right.
So that's all I brought, honey. I got that's a lot. That's all I got. That's quite a bit.
Yeah. And each time we'll essentially be doing that. We're going to go deep and we're going to go into some really crazy places with these stories, but we're also going to bring it back to what's just some simple hits on what that can mean for you.
Yeah. And maybe only one story stood out for you today.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's what was meant
That's
to.
what you need to know.
Yeah.
You take what resonates with you and you leave the rest.
Exactly.
So our next episode, Jen.
Oh, segue. Here we go.
Do you want to tell them what it is?
Sure.
What is it?
So we're talking a lot about the birds of prey. We're very much in a predator energy, and now we're going to shift it to being the prey. We're going for the rabbit or the hare,
the rabbit or the
whatever
hare.
you want to call it. But ironically, that's one of the falcon's favorite little treats.
Yes,
and rip their little spines out.
But it's again another one of those that is so packed with symbolism across the entire globe through all these different cultures. So we want to thank you for joining us here on Keeping It Simple. And if you want to give us a follow, give us a like, we'd appreciate it. We'd also love if you gave us a review, an honest review.
Yes, because we would love feedback.
We love feedback.
Like, really.
Especially since this is our first episode and we're trying to get it together.
It's our first premiere.
Yay!
Yeah. But also, if you see falcons and hawks, we'd also love to hear it. Especially if it's shortly after this episode, because if there's anything Brandy and I love, it's synchronicities.
And keep in mind that we will be doing live Q&As, so you can also send us information. If you have a question about how perhaps one is showing up in your life and you're not really sure how to interpret it or understand what that sign means, and perhaps we will cover it in our live Q&A.
That's right. You get a little bit of a reading, symbol reading.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.